I stood in the kitchen, carefully preparing dinner, when Bob's loud laughter echoed through the house. "Don't make dog food in front of the family," he sneered, his voice dripping with ridicule. I froze, the knife in my hand hovering over the cutting board. Dog food? Seriously? I was at a loss for words. His harsh insult stung more than I wanted to admit. What else could that awful comment be about? "Just redo it already." I snapped back, my tone sharper than I intended. Bob blinked, seemingly caught off guard. "What?" "I'm still out shopping, though," he replied, confused. I didn't care. If he was going to mock me, I was going to get my revenge in my own way. "I'm Lucy, and I'm about to turn 50 this year. I have a daughter, but she's moved out, leaving just me and my husband, Bob." Bob works at a major employment advertising company, a well-known firm often featured in commercials. Maybe it's the influence of his ambitious colleagues, but Bob is obsessed with status. To him, a man's worth is measured by his salary. He works late almost every night, constantly striving to climb the corporate ladder. Despite everything, I supported him in silence, believing that his efforts would eventually bring us happiness. I met Bob through a friend's introduction. Working from home, I rarely had chances to meet new people. In fact, my last relationship had been in college. Concerned about my loneliness, a friend introduced me to Bob. From the moment I met him, I was drawn in. He was fresh, stylish, and carried himself with confidence. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his neatly styled hair made him look like someone straight out of a magazine. Compared to him, I felt plain and out of place. Yet, Bob was direct and charming. "I'm busy with work and can't meet often, but I'll cherish you. Please be kind to me," he said, extending his hand. Without hesitation, I shook it. We started dating, though our time together was always limited. Our outings were simple, quick meals or coffee dates. His phone rang constantly, often cutting our time short. "It's work. Sorry, I have to go to the office." "I'll make it up to you later," he would say before rushing off. It was disappointing, but I understood. That's just how it is, I told myself. Then, not long after, Bob proposed. Overjoyed and naive, I accepted, believing we were stepping into a beautiful future together. Little did I know I was walking straight into a nightmare. Fast forward nearly 25 years, and Bob's late nights have become the norm. Ever since we got married, his job has always come first. He works overtime almost every day and only comes home to sleep. The meals I prepare? Left untouched. Conversations? Non-existent. One evening, early in our marriage, I finally voiced my feelings. "Can you come home a bit earlier? Let's have dinner together once in a while." I thought I was being reasonable, but Bob's reaction stunned me. His face twisted with anger. "Since when did you start giving me orders? You think you're better than me now?" I shrank back, startled. This was a side of him I had never seen before. "I didn't mean it like that." "I'm sorry," I said quickly, panicked by his hostility. But Bob wasn't in a forgiving mood. "Don't act all high and mighty with your little income." Talking back to me now, he scoffed before storming into our bedroom. For the next week, he barely spoke to me. I felt awful. Had I really been out of line? Was I expecting too much? My lack of relationship experience made me anxious, and I regretted speaking up. So I made a decision. I would never question Bob again. One evening, I gathered my courage and spoke to Bob directly. "I want you to come home early." His reaction was predictable. A sigh, a scoff, then silence. From the beginning of our marriage, I had always spoken to Bob with the utmost respect. He held outdated beliefs, ones that dictated a wife should follow quietly, obey without question, and never challenge her husband. "Respect and obey me," he'd say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I never argued. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't know any better. I lost my parents to illness when I was young, and without them, I had no clear example of what a loving, functional family should look like. At the time, I was deeply in love with Bob, and the thought of breaking up over something as simple as his old-fashioned views seemed unbearable. So, I complied. I silenced my doubts. I convinced myself that Bob's words weren't commands, just expectations. Expectations I had to meet. Before our marriage, Bob was kind, thoughtful. He never pressured me to speak a certain way, never looked down on me. He held my hand like I was something precious. "You're special to me," he once said. But the moment we were married, that man disappeared. I spent 25 years hoping he would return. That one day, the stress of work would ease, and he'd be the caring person I once knew. That maybe, just maybe, the version of Bob I loved wasn't entirely gone. But he never changed. Year after year, I endured loneliness and neglect. I spent my days crushed by despair, barely holding on. And just when I thought I had grown numb to it all, a single moment shattered everything. It was just another late night. "I'm home. I'm tired. I'm taking a bath," Bob mumbled, yawning as he walked in. "Welcome home. The bath is ready for you." I greeted him, forcing a smile. The clock read 2 a.m. As usual, he had probably taken a taxi home. I moved to hang up his jacket, going through the familiar motions of our routine. But as I lifted the fabric, I froze. An unfamiliar scent clung to the fabric. A distinct, floral perfume. It wasn't mine. Bob always wore cologne before heading to work, but this scent was different. New. I stared at the jacket in my hands, my heart pounding. Was it a misunderstanding? Maybe it was from a coworker. An accident. A transfer of scent in a crowded place. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to not assume the worst. I could have confronted him right away, but I knew how it would go. He'd get angry, dismiss my concerns, turn it into my fault. "Don't act high and mighty. You think you're better than me?" I had heard it all before, and the perfume alone wasn't solid proof. So I swallowed my suspicions. Weeks passed, but the scent of perfume? It never faded. Every time Bob came home late, it was there, clinging to his clothes like a ghost, a silent message I could no longer ignore. By then, my feelings for Bob had already cooled. A man who mocked me, a man who belittled me, and now a man who might be cheating? No thanks. I had spent decades being the perfect wife, sacrificing my own happiness for a marriage that only took from me. But at that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. Bob was about to learn that I wasn't the same woman he married. Bob probably thought I would never bring up divorce. Maybe he assumed I was too weak, too obedient to even consider it. And even if I did, he likely believed it wouldn't affect him much. I made no sudden moves, no obvious signs of rebellion. But I was waiting. Then one day, Bob spoke to me as if nothing was wrong. "Next Sunday, we're having a family dinner at my parents' house. Make sure you help Mom out that day." Just like that. No request, only a command. As always, every summer, Bob's family held a gathering at his parents' house. I was always expected to help his mother, Susan, with preparations. Not cooking, though. That was Susan's job. I was given the role of cleaning, tidying up, and serving guests. Last year, after Bob's father passed away, the family dinner was canceled. But now it was back. Bob seemed particularly excited this time. "Kate will be back too, after such a long time," he announced, grinning. Kate. Our only daughter. She had been away at university for a while. Unlike me, Bob absolutely adored her. "Yes, she is," I replied indifferently. He didn't notice my lack of enthusiasm. He never did. On the day of the dinner, I arrived early at my in-laws' house to clean and prepare the living room. Susan, my mother-in-law, was polishing a bookshelf. "I threw my back out the other day," she sighed. "I hate making you do all this, Lucy." Her voice was filled with genuine regret. Unlike Bob, Susan was always kind to me. Then Bob arrived. "Lucy, are you properly helping Mom? She has a bad back, so make sure you take care of the relatives too," he shouted loudly, then laughed as if it were some big joke. I clenched my fists. "Bob." Susan scolded him, frowning. But Bob just waved her off. "Shut up. I just wish Kate would arrive already." And with that, he disappeared into his old bedroom, leaving me to do all the work. "We're out of alcohol. Could you go buy some?" Susan asked apologetically. "Yes, I'll go now," I replied. I left for the supermarket, glad for the brief escape. While piling bottles of alcohol into my cart, my phone rang.
Bob.
I sighed. I already knew this call would not be pleasant. Reluctantly, I answered. Hello. The background was loud. Relatives had started arriving. I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, conversation. Then, Bob's voice rang out, loud and mocking. Don't make dog food in front of the relatives. Laughter followed. He ridiculed me again, loudly.
Publicly.
I froze in the middle of the supermarket aisle, my grip tightening around my phone. Huh, I managed to say, stunned. Bob was still laughing on the other end of the call, completely oblivious to the damage he had just done. Something in me snapped. I was done. So, I made my decision. When I returned, I gathered every dish I had carefully prepared for dinner, and I threw it all out into the yard. The guests gasped. Chaos erupted. A relative turned to Bob. What the hell is wrong with you? They asked. And for the first time in 25 years, Bob had nothing to say. Bob had always ridiculed me. He had called me weak, worthless, a bad wife. But this time he went too far. Don't make dog food in front of the relatives. His voice rang through the phone, loud and mocking, as if humiliating me was his greatest joy. I stood frozen in the supermarket aisle, gripping my phone tightly. The words stung, not just because they were cruel, but because they weren't even true. Bob, I'm still out shopping. His laughter faltered. Huh, I'm at the supermarket right now, and it's a 40-minute drive from there. How could I possibly have made dinner? Silence. Bob wasn't expecting me to fight back. Then who made this meal? He demanded. It's still warm and obviously freshly cooked. Mom said she didn't make it, so it must be you. I could hear the confusion in his voice, but I didn't care. Anyway, I'll be home soon. We can talk then. And with that, I hung up. Whatever hell Bob was about to face, I didn't care. I returned to my in-laws' house, bags of alcohol in hand. Susan met me at the door, her expression awkward. She had obviously overheard Bob's earlier rude remarks and didn't know what to say. Lucy, sorry for the trouble, she said hesitantly. Before I could answer, Bob came storming to the entrance. His face was red with anger. Lucy, cut it out. Making such unappetizing food, and then denying it? Your cooking isn't fit for humans anyway. I blinked, stunned by his arrogance. Bob, how can you say such rude things to Lucy? Susan scolded. But Bob wasn't listening. Instead, he smirked, confident.
Proud.
Mom, you should teach Lucy how to be a proper wife, he announced. As if I wasn't standing right there. As if I wasn't a person, just some object that needed to be trained. I exhaled slowly, controlling my anger. But inside, I had never been more certain of what I was about to do. I looked Bob straight in the eyes and smiled. Actually, I didn't make today's meal. Bob's smirk wavered. What? Shall I call the person who did? I asked sweetly. His smug expression vanished. Confusion turned into fear. I turned to the doorway. You can come out now. Footsteps echoed in the room. A figure stepped forward. And as they appeared, Bob's face went pale. His hands trembled, because standing in front of him was the last person he ever expected to see. Bob's face went pale. His hands trembled, because the person who stepped forward wasn't just anyone. It was Kate, his beloved daughter. Dad, I'm sorry for making dog food, Kate said quietly. Bob blinked.
Once. Twice.
Shock washed over him. No, that's a misunderstanding. I thought Lucy made it, he stammered. Why did you cook in hiding? He asked, voice flustered. I crossed my arms, watching his panic unfold. I asked Kate to do it, I said simply. Bob's gaze darted toward his mother. Mom, did you know about this? Susan nodded, her face pale. I did, she admitted. I smiled, my voice calm but firm. I wanted to surprise you with Kate's cooking. Susan helped me keep it a secret because she knew how much you adore Kate. Susan swallowed hard. I thought it would be a nice surprise, she murmured. But now, the truth was unraveling, and Susan could finally see Bob for who he really was. I took a deep breath and turned to Susan. I'm sorry, Susan, I said gently. I know you believed Bob and I were getting along, but the truth is we're not. Susan's eyes widened. What do you mean? Bob barely comes home, and when he does, it's just to sleep.
He doesn't talk to me.
He doesn't even eat the meals I prepare. And more than that, I took a deep breath, locking eyes with Bob. He's cheating. A gasp rippled through the room. Susan's face turned ashen. That's a lie, Bob shouted. You can't just throw around accusations like that. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. I have evidence. Bob snatched it from my hand, flipping through the contents. His face grew paler with every page. I crossed my arms. Bob, you didn't think I'd notice, did you? But I did. The perfume on your jacket, it was never mine. That's why I hired a private investigator. Bob's mouth opened, but no words came out. And the results? I continued. Far worse than I imagined. I turned to the stunned audience of relatives. Bob wasn't just having one affair. He was juggling multiple women. Some from work, some from business deals. And while I was at home balancing work, house chores, and raising Kate, he was out enjoying himself. Bob clenched his fists, shaking with frustration. But I wasn't done. And recently, I added, you can't cheat without spending money, can you? Designer bags. Expensive restaurants. I wondered why you kept cutting back on household expenses, even though your salary was more than enough. But now I know. Bob's lips pressed into a thin line. The relatives murmured in disgust. Bob, to cheat when you have such a good wife? That's despicable, one of them muttered. Kate, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. Dad, is this true? Her voice was cold, distant. Bob swallowed hard. Kate shook her head, her disappointment cutting deeper than any insult ever could. I turned back to Bob, my voice steady. I'm divorcing you. Bob's head snapped up. No. Lucy, wait. You can't divorce me. Why not? Because I've spent most of our savings on my affairs. I can't afford a divorce. I stared at him, utterly baffled. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You cheated. You humiliated me. You spent our savings on other women. And now your reason for staying married is money? Bob opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The room fell into a heavy silence. I turned my back to him. You might as well remarry one of your mistresses, I said. But don't worry, I'll be taking a fair settlement. Bob looked like he wanted to scream, but there was nothing he could say, because this was checkmate. And for the first time in years, I was finally free. Bob sat there, his arrogance still intact. Even after being exposed, humiliated, and abandoned by his family, he still looked down on me. I had one last shock to deliver. You think I'm dependent on you, don't you? I said, arms crossed. Bob frowned. What do you mean? I said, I make just as much as you, if not more. Bob's face visibly changed. What? He blinked, shaking his head in disbelief. I'm a freelance engineer. My income fluctuates, but yearly? It's comparable to yours. His jaw tightened. That's impossible. It's not. I continued, savoring every moment of his shocked expression. I graduated from a distance learning university and worked for a major telecommunications company. I went independent after that, and now I have a steady stream of clients. Unlike you, I actually manage my finances. Bob slumped down, his shoulders sagging. I can't believe Lucy earns as much as me, he muttered. Reality was hitting him hard. He had mocked my work, belittled me, and held back money, thinking I was helpless without him. But in truth, he had needed me far more than I ever needed him. Bob stayed silent for a moment before suddenly grasping at straws. Kate, you don't want your parents to divorce, right? He turned to her desperately. Tell Lucy to reconsider. Kate's eyes turned ice cold. Dad, I'm disappointed in you, she said flatly. Bob flinched. I want Mom to be happy, even if it means divorce, she continued. And I'll marry someone who doesn't care about whether I'm from a single-parent household. You? I don't care about you anymore. Bob's mouth fell open. He turned to me, then back to Kate, as if trying to process her words. No, Kate. You don't mean that. I do. Kate's expression was one of pure disgust. When Mom told me everything, I was furious. I don't need a dad like you. You cheated. You refused to provide for us. You deserve everything that's happening to you.
Go all out, Mom.
I support you. Bob's entire world collapsed in that moment. He broke down, begging, "Don't abandon me, please." But no one stepped forward to comfort him. Susan and the relatives kept their distance, their eyes filled with disgust and disappointment. Bob was finally reaping what he had sown. Bob fought the divorce. "I refuse," he declared in the lawyer's office. "I won't sign the papers." I stayed calm. "You don't really want this marriage, Bob. You just don't want to be broke." Bob clenched his fists. I slid another document across the table. "There's overwhelming evidence of your affairs. If you don't agree to the divorce now, I'll push for a higher settlement." Sweat beaded on Bob's forehead. His pride and his bank account were on the line. He swallowed hard.
Fine.
"I'll sign." With a single stroke of a pen, my 25-year nightmare ended. Bob's mistress left him immediately after the divorce. It turned out she was only interested in him because of his money. Once she realized he had none left, she dumped him without hesitation. Not only that, but I sued her for compensation, which she was legally obligated to pay.
Now?
Bob was a broke, lonely, middle-aged man. His family, who once adored him, wanted nothing to do with him. Even Kate blocked his number. "I can't see someone who cheats as my father," she had said. The relatives who had once gathered around Bob now avoided him. He had burned every bridge, and now he was drowning in the ashes. One day, he sent a letter through his lawyer. "I'm truly sorry. I'm so lonely now. Please, can we start over? Maybe then Kate and Mom will talk to me again." I read it, and I laughed. Bob must have been desperate to write such nonsense. But it was too late. I had moved on. I instructed my lawyer to send a firm refusal. There would be no reconciliation. By the end of the year, I had moved out of the house I once shared with Bob. With the divorce settlement, I bought my own apartment, spacious, cozy, and just for me. Today, Kate was visiting for the holidays. "Do you want to see Dad?" I asked. She grimaced. "No way," she said immediately. "I'll never forgive him. Besides, celebrating the new year with just you is fun." I smiled. Life with Bob had been exhausting. But Kate? She was my greatest treasure. "Thank you, Kate," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. Kate blushed slightly. "I'm really glad you're my mom," she replied. A new year had begun. A new chapter of my life had started. And for the first time in decades, I was truly, finally happy. Please feel free to comment below if you like this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.